I might get started a few minutes early because our guest has a lot of stuff that he would like to tell us, and I'd like to give him the time to do that. Dr. David Keyes, received his PhD in physics from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri in 1984. For 38 years, he worked in the field of medical physics, being involved in therapeutic and diagnostic radiation physics. For his work, he was named a fellow by the American College of Radiology and by the American Association of Physicists in Medicine. Dr. Keyes has published 2 books, Exploring the Belief in the Real Presence and Discovering the Fullness of Reality. In addition, he has delivered numerous talks on a variety of topics, including how belief and knowledge are interrelated. I'm going to really enjoy this one. I'd like to introduce to you Dr. David Keyes.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate the crew, the group that put this together at this site. It's a wonderful site for this, wonderful facilities, lots of cooperation. You ask them to do something for you, and they do it, and I appreciate that so much. So, okay, let me get started. My talk is, my talk is about really knowing versus proving. And I'm not really here to convince you that it is Jesus of Nazareth who's in the cloth, but it is really, how do you do this? How do you convey that information to others, perhaps? If everything we learn from these couple days here stays within this room, well, we haven't really met the goal of this. The world out there, you talk to people and they just say, oh, the shrouds are fraud. I heard that years ago. And so we need to convey truth. And we need to do this. And there's many different things that have happened in the faith-science controversy that we can learn from. So let's get started. And the first question is, why are you here? Why is it the art, or is it the artifacts, history, whatever? Is that why you're here? And the answer is probably no. I mean, it's interesting enough. Maybe if you work in the textile industry, well, that would be a great place to come here, but it's not that. Is it because the burial cloth, we think it might be that of Jesus of Nazareth? And I would say that's not the reason either. But the question is, it's all due to the claims of Christianity that Jesus is God and that he was raised from the dead. And either you're here to debunk that, or you're here to understand greater. That's why you're at this conference, so you can understand it and pass it on. There are some people who are really not well known, and they're probably in the other session. But all of you, I assume, have spent a considerable amount of time looking and reading and seeing information on the shroud. Okay. Well, we all have biases, and we know this to be true. We know that there are some things that no matter how much you convince people, they will deny it. Let's pick on the Flat Earth Society. How much more information do you need to give in order to convince them that the Earth is a sphere? Well, it's very difficult. So we have biases. And anytime when you do research, when you address a problem, you can't go into the research knowing the answer. Instead, you go into the research to develop evidence that can lead you to the answer. And that's what is critical, being led not by the science, but because not everything is science. And the Shroud of Turin is certainly one of those things. So Carl Sagan said, we must understand the cosmos as it is and not confuse it with how we wish it to be. Now, if you take his statement and you just take out the word cosmos and put it in the word Shroud of Turin, you'd be exactly where we need to be. We must understand the Shroud of Turin as it is and not confuse it with how we wish it to be. The point is we have to be really searching for truth, and if you are only giving a spin on the truth, well, people won't believe you. They'll pick that up. Politicians, they always put a spin on what is happening in the day, and you just sort of roll your eyes a little bit, and you don't want that to happen. You want people to feel that this is truth as best as you know it. And of course, truth cannot contradict truth. If it contradicts truth, then either one is false or the other one's false, or they're both false, or what more likely happens, it's true about some aspect of whatever you're talking about. And the other one's true of some other aspect. And they're both true in their own sense, but they're incomplete. Okay, so we've been through this before. If you look at history of science and faith, of course, we originally did not have science, and everything was just basically spiritual. And those people had a much closer connection to the spiritual world than perhaps many of us do nowadays. But by the 1800s, into the 1800s, most scientists are not, I can't say most, but many scientists believe that the universe was in a steady state. The galaxies and everything always were there and always will be there. Maybe there were some sources of energy that they saw was funneling into it, but that's what it was. And then around 1927, a Belgian priest, Father Georges Lemaitre, came up with a theory that the universe is expanding. And if the universe is expanding, then earlier it was smaller and smaller, and eventually it was a point, and the universe was developed out of nothing. And of course, this sounded way too much like the book of Genesis to many people. And so they ridiculed him for a while. And even Albert Einstein met with Father Lemaitre and told him, Father, your math is exquisite, but your physics is rotten, to paraphrase him. But fortunately for Father Lemaitre, 2 years later, Hubble found some evidence that the universe is expanding. But did all the physicists jump aboard? No, they looked for other reasons to debunk that. And we have Sir Fred Hoyle, who had a radio show. This is in the 50s. He's a British astrophysicist. He had a radio show, and in the description of the beginning of the universe, he called it the Big Bang to ridicule the concept. But the Big Bang is what stuck, and that's where we got the name for that process. So he continued working, and he was interested in knowing how did we get all the different atoms that we found in the early universe, the protons and neutrons, the deuterons, helium, etc. And he was really concerned because there seemed to be an excess amount of carbon from what one would predict. So he predicted there was a different state within the carbon atom that no one had discovered yet. And it would resonate with the energies coming into it, and you'd have more carbon created. And so when he came to that, he came to the conclusion, this is what he said. He said, a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology. The facts seem to be so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. And now Hoyle was an atheist, and he makes a statement, and of course some people would substitute God for super intellect. Maybe some people would, like those who believe in the Matrix, would think of some other civilization that is controlling us. Okay, but he didn't convert. He did not convert. He didn't decide that there is a God. He just continued on. So that is the origin of the universe. That is sort of the same conflict that we, backwards. There we go. Okay, and we have other things. They continue to working, and as we said, he came to the conclusion that there was fine-tuning with the carbon-6, okay, and the way it absorbs. And people kept working on this, and in the 70s, there's almost an explosion of looking at what would happen if everything changed just a little bit in the laws of physics. And you change the gravitational constant just a little bit, and you change the electromagnetism just a little bit, and all these things we find out that you wouldn't have a universe. It would either expand so fast that you wouldn't have time to form galaxies, or it would contract and go back to the single point. And so they continue working on this. The expansion rate, the cosmological constant, has been calculated that it must be accurate to with 1 in 10 to the 120th. And that's supposed to be not a minus, but a plus there. Okay, which is just an incredible number that you can't really even fathom as a human. Your mind cannot really take it. So the universe is so fine-tuned that what Hoyle had earlier said about it looks like something had monkeyed around just doesn't seem fathomable. And so how do you get around that? And they want to get around the God issue. And so if it has to be accurate to 10 to the 120 universe, you come up with the idea, well, maybe we're not the only universe. Maybe there's 10 to 120 universes out there, and we are just the lucky guys that were to be in this universe. And as part of the development of the universe and cosmic evolution and our solar system, and our sun just happened to be the right size, and the Earth is just perfectly right distance away, and it's got this little wobble, so you heat the north and you heat the south, and you got magnetic poles to sweep away a lot of the protons that are heading towards it from the sun, etc. We're just lucky. We're just lucky. Okay, and so other things, evolution versus six-day creationism. On the other side, people are literalists about the Genesis and say, well, it has to be 6 days. And when in fact, the Catholic Church way back in the 4th century, Augustine, he poo-pooed all that. He says, it's being taught is to teach meaning, not to teach science. Okay, intelligent design. Okay, along came the search for the origin of life, and they tried many different things. Okay, but one thing that they did know that they had to achieve was a DNA molecule. And Sir Francis Crick, was one of the people that determined the structure of the DNA. And the problem is that the DNA has been described by Harvard and other universities, just to help people understand, it's almost like a file cabinet. And you pull out a file and you find out how to make a certain protein. You pull out another file and how to control the metabolism. You pull out another file and you look for the instructions on how to divide and how do you go from being an embryo to a full adult. All that is contained in DNA. So this is a real problem because information is not material. Information is transcendent to the material world. And so it gets even worse. And they keep doing studies, and of course, Francis Crick is involved in other things. But here's what he said. There it is. He said that biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. So what he's saying is that no matter how much evidence you show me, I have to put it into the limelight that this is just a random thing that developed over time. So forget about this. You look at photosynthesis, just a random thing. You look at medicine and the body and the way it works, everything's just randomly developed. You look at the ecology, it's just all random. Well, that defies what you're seeing. And so there have been people who've been proposing intelligent design, but they get in trouble in the current academic environment. So this is, we're having this discussion where people want to insist they have a bias against something that is transcendent. If you say that it's both physical and transcendent, they have a bias, and you have to figure out from the physical side. And the Shroud of Turin exactly is an example of that. We have a very physical thing. We have an image on a cloth, an old image, and yet it's a spiritual side. Is it from Jesus of Nazareth? And if it is, even if it's just a wonderful drawing or image, there's still a lot of spiritual things that people can get when you see all the suffering that Jesus did for us. So, other things that are non-physical, near-death experiences, there are tens of thousands of near-death experiences that have been developed. Blind people from birth who have a near-death experience, they can come back and they can describe every little detail from when they were outside the body. Okay, how do they do this? They can't see, and they even near-death experiences. They're not all in a hospital. Sometimes they're along the roadside, but they have it where somebody will go and they will go into the waiting room and they see Uncle Fred and they can describe what Uncle Fred was wearing, and they didn't like what Uncle Fred was saying, so they have emotions and they have memory. All these things indicate that the mind is actually not part of the physicality of the body. The mind and the brain are two separate things, and there's a number of experiments that have been done with this, where they split the right hemisphere from the left hemisphere of the brain, but yet somehow the mind combines all that information. So there are many things out there that says that there's more to existence than just physicality. And going the other direction, you have scientists who, like the Matrix, they say, nothing is real. We are a computer simulation, and that somebody out there is controlling this. Hard to believe in my mind, but we, again, from a theological point of view, it's what we say, God is participate in your existence. And by the way, I had my PhD in physics, and when I was about 50, I went back to get a master's in theology, which makes me kind of step into both worlds.
It makes you a little strange, right? It makes you that combination.
I started out strange. Okay. So part of the issue is we can't know anything absolutely. Even all the things about the physics, they talk about a space-time fabric, and we have to say, well, what is that? You can do all the mathematics as if it's something that we think of as physical, but it's not physical. Fields are not physical, but you put a charged particle in an electric field, and it's going to move. Okay, there's many things that we do not really understand. We are limited in our knowledge, so we do the best we can. And so we try to learn the best we can. We try to get knowledge. Well, how do you get knowledge? Knowledge is based on trust. Trust is a propedeutic for knowledge. You have to have trust or you don't learn anything. You can't know anything. You learn when you're a child something that your parents told you because you trust them. Your teachers trust them. You read books, you trust them. You go to conferences and people talk about it and you trust them. And some of them you don't trust, right? And if you don't trust them, you're not going to agree with what they're saying. Even your senses can lie to you. You drink alcohol. Maybe your senses are not telling you the complete truth about how safe it is for you to drive home. Okay, so trust is the propedeutic for knowledge. So without trust, there is no knowledge, and of course, we get down to the point where knowledge can be wrong. So disbelieving, doubting, believing, knowing. It's all like the color, like white and black. And you take black, you add a little bit of white, and it becomes a very dark gray. You add some more, it becomes gray, then it becomes light gray, and then it becomes white. Same thing with trust. When you have no trust in something, you're not going to believe them, and then maybe you have more experience with them, and you begin to trust them a little bit. And then if they continually tell you the truth all the time, then maybe when they say something, you can know that, even if you can't prove that. And you can prove, the only real things you can prove is abstract ideas like arithmetic or logic. Everything else is always an error. Every physics measurement, any measurement always has an error bar. We even say, just last week, saw an article saying there are no such thing as things. There are no such things as protons. There are no such things as neutrons. Okay, instead it's a probability that the energy comes together and it appears like a particle when it's really not. Okay, it goes against everything we were taught. Okay, so it's hard to know. And so you come to a point of willful assent. You don't trust, and then you do trust, but there's a point where you have to step over that line and say, I believe. Whether it's I believe in God, or I believe that the Cardinals are going to suddenly turn their season around and win the World Series. You know, where is that point? And that's something you have to establish in your life on different things. How do you come to know anything? How do you know that your wife or your spouse love you? Is it because you do tests? You know, you don't take out the garbage and see if they still like you when you're supposed to take out the garbage. Is that a test you use? No, you come through experiential to know that the person loves you, but you really can't prove it, because tomorrow they may not love you. Or as my wife sometimes says, I love you, I just don't like you. So anyway, our legal system is, of course, reasonable doubt. We never know 100% that the person is guilty, because maybe somebody made this up, or somebody paid off somebody $1 billion to set it up to make it look like you're guilty. So here's just a diagram of the whole concept of, does the arrow show? Yeah, it does. So you go from dark to light, okay? And if you really know something, that's fine. But if you're not quite as sure, maybe your no is in the lowercase. Okay. But sometime or another, you have to get to where you know something. And that depends upon the amount of trust you have. And this is just an example. If you have a single source and a single event, like the weatherman, you know, a single event, what the weather is going to be like tomorrow. Well, if your experience is that he's always wrong, you're not going to trust him, etc. The more you have somebody else has got greater weather prediction, you begin to trust them more. You begin to know that it's going to rain tomorrow, or maybe it's going to be 95 degrees again today. And if you have alternatively multiple events, a stockbroker tells you to buy something and you just put in $100. Okay, and it does well. And the next time he tells you to buy something, well, now you got some experience with this guy. Now you put in $500, it does well. And then you do $1,000, you know, as you get more experience, more sources of evidence that you can trust this person, you come to know that he is a good person to go to for advice. And then, of course, he tells you something and it plunks downward. Same thing, you can have multiple sources, 1,000 people telling you the same thing. Maybe it's true. Okay, and if you don't trust anybody, you are basically delusional. You are insane. You can't go with life without having trust in anybody other than, you know, people just trust themselves. And actually, some people don't even trust themselves. They're afraid to do something because they're afraid that maybe I will fall asleep when I'm driving or whatever. Okay. Now, you can make an estimate of this. And the whole purpose of doing this type of thing, the goal is to recognize your biases. So if you have let's say you're doing something about the shroud, and you're looking at the whether or not we think it's the shroud of Jesus Christ, and you're looking at the historical record, and you say, oh, I believe everything they say. I'm 100% trusting in that. And I trust the study of coins, and I trust the study of images, etc. I really like this way this image is created. And if you're doing everything, well, you're completely biased in this. And so you need to see, am I biased in this? Same thing with the people who continually deny, no matter what you tell them, they're going to be biased in the other direction. So what is your degree of bias? So when you're looking at something, you can give a weight to a particular aspect, which is the W or omega, whatever, and assign a value to that, how much you think and how much is your trust factor. And when you do this, like we're going to do in just a minute about this shroud, you can get an estimate of what your faith is, what your belief is in that. So we're just going to, again, take whether it is Jesus in the shroud, if that's who the image is supposed to be of. And we're just going to look at it from strictly a Scripture point of view, nothing else. I'm not going to look at any other aspects and just see what that can tell us. If it is truly art, then you have to ask the who, the how, the when, by whom, and why. And if it's a natural physical process, well, you can get rid of the by whom and why, because there is no by whom and why. It just happened. And if you believe it's transcendent, you put that back in, because now you're interested in who caused this to happen and why was it done. So if you're dealing with the who, and you take the approach that it can be anybody who's lived on the earth, okay? That maybe it was a body of some man in Spain, or maybe it was a body of some person in Jerusalem or somebody in Siberia, and you just open it all the way, because we don't know where this body came from. We have no way of proving that at this point of the analysis, because we're only addressing it as such. Okay, if it's intentional, then the artist would try to study about crucifixion and make as many things as he can to be correct, or an artist or an artist scammer would try to make it as correct as he possibly can. Okay, if it's unintentional, well then it is what it is. But you're detail. If something happens unintentionally, nobody was out making it per se, there's going to be detail in that the artist wouldn't really bother with or even know. And that's what we kind of find with the shroud, is that there's detail in the shroud that tells us about the blood serum and things like that the artist wouldn't know anything about, but that's not going to be part of this talk. Okay. Now, if it's Jesus of Nazareth, you have narrowed down the spectrum. Now we have a person who there are historical accounts of Jesus of Nazareth. Even if you don't believe the historical accounts, if you don't believe that the Gospels and things, if you think they were just made up by the church afterward to supplant their beliefs, well, it is still the book that a scammer would have chosen to make his image by. He would have chosen what was there, because if he's going to try and scam somebody, he's going to try and make it that the Bibles were available. Maybe they were very expensive, whatever. After Gutenberg, you could buy one, okay? And so someone who's scamming an artist who's doing it, he would do it according to that. So it would be intentionally created. So he tries to show as many aspects as he can get out of Scripture. If it's unintentional, freak of nature, well then you get what you get, okay? There's no control over that, and so your analysis is going to be a little different. So we've all seen the shroud. Shroud's 14 foot 4 inches long, and 3 foot 7 inches wide, about. And so that's about 8 cubits by 2 cubits. And of course, that sounds very biblical, so that's why somebody would put it in that terminology. But we don't know if it was designed by cubits. We don't know which set of cubits was actually being used, because there's all kinds of different measurements for that. And it's a herringbone cloth that, I've seen pictures of it. I've seen the shroud in person, and yes, it's a herringbone cloth. We've all seen pictures of the shroud. We've seen the way that he's lying there, etc. Okay, so now we're going to look, again, this is just strictly versus Scripture. So we picked the Scripture such as Isaiah 53:9. And he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. And then Joseph of Arimathea, here's a rich man, went to Pilate and begged for the body. And then we know that he bought the linens, which a rich man would buy rich linens. And so we look at the shroud, and we look at it from the artist's point of view. If you believe an artist did this, well then sure, he would make he knows this information, so he would make the shroud. He would buy a very expensive piece of linen to put this image on. Again, it's so the likelihood of that for an artist is 1-to-1, because he's the one that's making this thing himself. But for anybody else, it's highly unlikely that you're going to have a rich shroud and that it's going to be put in a rich man's grave. How likely is that going to be happening? So I assign the artist 1-to-1 possibility, probability that Jesus, not God, event, a 1 in 100. I give it a weight of 8 because it's important, but it's not the most important thing. And I really kind of believe the story pretty well, so I give it a 90% on how much I believe. Okay, and now here's another one, a little different. Paul, in the letter to the Ephesians, talks about the full stature of Christ. Now, when you think of somebody with stature, what do you think of? Usually it's someone who's bigger than average, who is in great shape, and they probably have deeds and things that they have done. You don't you don't choose Napoleon and say he's a man of stature, and you don't say Danny DeVito is a man of stature. Okay? You use other descriptions for him. So the guy who's an artist trying to, how do I show that this body is that of a man of stature? Well, I'm going to make him taller than everybody else, and I'm going to make him muscular. He looks like almost like a linebacker, in part because of the way the shroud is wrapped around him. But we know from present statistics that 1% of the population is 7 inches taller than the average population. So if the average height of the Jews were 5'4" at the time of Christ, 7 inches taller would be 5'11". So by just design, this is a man that would be stature and literally looked up to. And we know that in our culture, businesses, CEOs are often are taller than other people. Not always, but often. So that is something the artist has control over. So he can hit it right on the nail, make him robust, make him a male, make him someone who looks like they're 30 to 35 years old, etc. So the artist, I put the probability of making him 5'11". I said 1 in 3. Well, you don't have to be that much taller. Maybe it's 5'8" or 5'10" or whatever. So I said maybe it's 1 in 3 that he chose 5'11" as this person. Whereas if it's a Jesus type everyday person at the time of Jesus, the likelihood that his image on the shroud is 5'11" is going to be 1 in 100. It's very unlikely that he would be that tall. Okay. By his transgressions. Now, again, you go to Scripture and you find out that Jesus was struck by the guards multiple times. Okay, and so if you're going to make an image of Jesus, you would put an example where he's going to be swollen cheeks, the nose is tipped, tip of the nose is bent a little bit, etc. There, get rid of that face. Okay. But what about the ordinary person? And I'm cynical enough to think that the Roman guards were not kind to anybody. And I would expect that probably most of the people who tended to be insurgents would have been struck by guards, so I'm not surprised for an ordinary case that it would turn out to be a bruised, calcareous body. And so I gave that a weight of 8, and my probability is I think this happened to everybody to some extent. Okay, and now the stripes. The whole idea of stripes we associate with scourging. When this was said by Isaiah, there wasn't a crucifixion. That came along years later, but he made the prediction that by his stripes we'd be known. People have looked at the shroud, and they have said 100 to 120. Some people say even more, but let's just take the 100 to 120. And the artist could have gone to the local Roman museum to see what they used for scourging and found, there's a flagram with 3 little leather tongs on it with bones or lead, whatever, and says, I'm going to put that in my image. And so he draws an image that has 120 scourge marks in it. He's the artist. He can do anything he wants. But if it's a body if it's truly a Jesus or any other person at that time, you don't have any control over that. You have what you have. And so you see these things, well, then apparently he was scourged that much. It's real that he had that many scourges and would be near death by the time they got finished. And of course we know that Paul got scourged 5 times, but he only got 39 because you didn't want to, if you did more than 40, then you get in trouble. So they stop at 39. So I put a weight of 10. This is very important, and I'm very confident in that. Okay, and here we see there's a flagram here with 3 on it, and this is an image that shows scourge marks, and this next one has been enhanced. And you can see everywhere you go, groups of 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. So it's quite evidence that the scourging that was done to this body was with a flagram with 3 tongs on it, and they've even measured, well, how tall was likely that the person they determined that there's 2 different people, and one's taller than the other, so they come in at different angles, and that research has been done. So, okay. Now the next one. Mainly it's the crown of thorn that's not in red, but should be. That is really something that is known to have happened only to one person. Did that ever happen to? In the whole history of crucifixion. Okay, and so the artist reading the scriptures would make marks on his head, and of course it could be a circle, like a Roman type crown, or it could be a Byzantine type crown with a cap. Maybe he's from Byzantine, or maybe he was just a good guesser and he made it a cap type of thing in his drawings. And this is very significant, so I gave it a weight of 10 and with 100% confidence that it's true. And there's the picture of the Roman with the crown, and there's the Byzantine crown, etc. Now, carrying the crosspiece, I'm kind of running through this, but it's heavy. And Jesus, this person who's been scourged is weak, and the chances of him falling is going to be great. And Scripture is going to tell us that this is all my bones are out of joint. So would it be surprising that an artist wouldn't take and put in a dislocated shoulder in there to show that he's out of joint, just like the scriptures say? Okay, and of course, in the actual victims of the crucifixion, I'm not surprised if many of them also dislocated their shoulders. They're weak. They got this thing. Sometimes they're roped to the patellum, or other times they're just carrying it. But the thing is, they're going to fall a lot, and it's very likely it's reasonably likely that they would get dislocated shoulders. So, but it's not critical, and the same thing with the dirt on the knees and things like that. Well, it's highly likely the person's going to fall, particularly when Jesus no longer could carry the cross and somebody else had to help him carry the cross. So that's evidence that he probably fell, and that's what we find on the shroud, of course. But any person going to be crucified probably would have happened to them. Okay, and now we look at the pierce my hands. You know, it says in Scripture, and particularly after Jesus rose, he wants Thomas to put his finger in the nail holes. So we know that Jesus was nailed. So an artist would put nail marks. Now, not everybody had nails. Some of them just were roped. Some of them had nails. Some of them were roped and nailed, etc. So, but an artist, they're free to do this, and they could just do just a straight nailing. Okay, whether or not you have 3 nails or 4 nails, Zugabe believed in like 4 nails would be appropriate. Other people believe 3 nails would be appropriate, and the artist chose to only show 2 nails because of the way that the bodies was arranged. So I give this a weight of 10 again, and with a high probability of that's why they had the holes in their bodies. Okay, confirmation of death. Again, Scripture says that he probably was, if Jesus was raised, which implies, which Scripture is saying, he's probably only there maybe 39 hours or so. He's probably died at around, like last speaker, around 3. He's risen maybe around 6 on Sunday. That's only 39 hours. You're not going to have a lot of decay of the body. Okay, so the guy would not put in any putrefaction evidence on the body. And if it was really a real body and it was 39 hours, well, you're not going to see that either. So both of them it's 1-to-1 for the artist because he's creating it, but how many bodies who are people crucified that had a shroud over them would have had their body removed before there was time of decay? Probably Jesus may have been the only one, but I gave it just a 1 in 20 because sometimes they gave the bodies back to the family after a couple days. Maybe they put some sort of shroud on him when they threw him in the pit. Okay. If they didn't have a rich man to put him in a nice little gravesite. Okay, so no putrefaction. So you get all this, you put all the numbers up, and it's 1 in 12 is the likelihood of being an artist would be correct. And of a Jesus-like body, it's actually 1 in, it's kind of overwritten that, 1 in 500 trillion, a big number. And if you just add another column to make it anybody in Europe, Middle East, whatever, not necessarily time of Jesus, but 800 AD, whenever the thing was made, you make 1 in 100,000 because there was a lot of crucifixions that did happen. And so it's like the body, the artist is the most likely one. But we're going to get rid of that in just a minute when we go to the how. Okay, so again, it's highly doubtful that it's just anybody because of all the agreement that does occur. It's much more likely it's Jesus of Nazareth, whether or not it's an artist, in which case it's intended to be the image of Jesus, and or it's a real happening, in which case it has to be the image of Jesus because of the supreme unlikelihood that it could have happened to any random individuals. And just to show you this, okay, this is an image of me. I may not like it, but it was a character image of me years ago, but you can recognize it's me, and you have an artist creating me. The artist was free to create any image. It doesn't mean that if it's an artist, we don't know what Jesus looked like. It's just an artist's rendition. If it's something that is transcendent or a freak of nature, well, then you really have what the image of the crucified person looked like. Okay. So here we go for the how. Okay, the reason with the how is this. You have this image, which we all know it's not, there's no paint, there's nothing on this image. There's no way an artist can make this. You have the coloring going along fibers. How does that happen? And they've tried many, many different ways in the last almost 50 years now. And they can only do it by introducing things that were not available in the 14th century or earlier, or even the 15th, 16th, 17th. It's not available. Okay, so this is something that is miraculous. We don't like using the word miraculous because it scares people away, but it's something that is completely unexplainable. And even though we've done all this research, we can't duplicate it. The only duplication comes from the theories like the neutrons and protons being coming out of the body, or they've used lasers to get the same sort of coloration. But they didn't have all that. We have no way to say that neutrons and protons are going to come out of the body unless you extend it to the idea that maybe that's a resurrection effect. Okay. So let me just get here to the images for thought. Okay. This isn't the only image that is transcendent. We look at the tilma of Our Lady of Juan Diego, Our Lady of Guadalupe, given to the cloak of Juan Diego's cloak. Okay, this image, like the shroud, has no brush marks. It has no paint. This image is even superior to the shroud in a certain way. It's iridescent. So just like you take a CD or a DVD and you hold it in the light and you see different colors depending on how you hold it, that's the truth of the Our Lady of Guadalupe. And when you get to a certain distance and certain angles, it looks like a European woman. You get to another way and it looks like an Aztec woman. And it's been around. There has been a bomb that was put right in front of it. And it blew out windows 2 blocks away. Nothing was damaged. A cross was right next to it. It was bent over. Nothing hurt it. It's a miraculous cloth, okay? There's no sizing or drawing. It was investigated with infrared photography, etc. So that there are other things out there like the shroud that are given to us as gifts so we can help understand. Okay, getting real close here. And because I want to get to this one, because this relates to us. There are Eucharistic miracles from consecrated hosts that sometimes happen, where the host will suddenly change into cardiac muscle that is attached to the rim of bread, and they are interspersed. There's no way to do that. And the cardiac muscle is from a Middle Eastern male. It's always the same place. It's always got capillaries. It's always got nerves in it. There have been many of them. We've had a number in this century already that are producing new cardiac muscle and producing blood. How does this happen? Well, it can't happen. Okay. You want me to stop, and I will stop. Fatima is another case, and now let me go back to the very last slide. And just, we had the thought you have to keep your mind open. The world's not just materialism. There's a transcendent side of materialism. Sherlock Holmes said, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And during COVID, I finished writing this book on faith and science, discovering the fullness of reality, with as many examples that I could give of things that do not fit science, but yet are true, whether it be the conscience, creativity, love, near-death experiences, Eucharistic miracles, the shroud. All these things are real, and they can be investigated. So, thank you for coming. I'm sorry I ran over a little bit.
Do we have one question? Go ahead.
Aware of any efforts or attempts to put together a group again of a consortium of different fields of scientists to approach the new pope with a single consensus of scientists to come back to the shroud again, much like the Scriptural? Are you aware of that process?
I am not aware of it. I'm aware that Ron Tesario was asking for a little bit of additional study on the blood from the shroud, because those Eucharistic miracles that produce blood, the mitochondria DNA, which is all female related, all comes from the same haploid. Okay, so that all these Eucharistic miracles that have happened have the same mother. That's interesting. So would the shroud, if you could get any mitochondrial DNA out of the shroud, which I don't know enough about that process, then you can compare it and see if it's the same mother as all these Eucharistic miracles mother.
Can I follow up? Rather than going to the Pope with a very narrow, and I don't mean that pejoratively, something of the blood, wouldn't we want to approach him with a comprehensive, we've got 18 fields of science that would like to come back to the shroud, much like the STIRP, and approach him with a comprehensive plan. You can only say yes or no, but rather than just piecemeal it to this science out, everybody.
I would say that would be a terrific idea to come to him, but I wouldn't do it. It's too soon in his pontificate. Maybe in a couple years he might be much more ready to do something like that, but I doubt if he would do that at this point.
All right. Let's say thank you to Dr. David Keys.
I do have some books outside if you like to do it. You can do it, or you can have it for free. Either way. So.